Perfect. Right, and now it is recording. Welcome to today's meeting, everyone. Michael, did you want to get us started? I think Michael's actually on the phone. Okay.
Hey guys, if you guys can go ahead and kick off 1 minute, I've got a call that I've got to take right quick.
Sounds good. Okay.
Well, while Michael's on that call, I can go ahead and start sharing stuff. Okay. Let's see. Okay. So hopefully everybody can see this. And I think it's almost all of it is actually on the screen.
And I'm back, guys. Sorry about that.
That's okay. We actually, Mike, I was just sharing my screen with the results of the competitive process. Hopefully everybody can see that. And this is usually where the committee starts off to look at what got funded competitively. And you see over on the right-hand couple columns under the approved, the 3 that are grayed out were not approved. So those were all programs that previously were in the competitive process. They were at the end of their 3-year grant cycle and they had to recompete. And none of them were picked up again. So they all dropped into the formula process, and you'll see all 3 of those again when we get to the formula chart. Impact America is highlighted in yellow because they were offered funding, but they have decided not to continue their AmeriCorps program. So they have actually declined that funding. And unfortunately, we don't get to shift it to someone else because it's not our money, and their funding level was well below what any of the other 3 programs that didn't get funded requested from the competitive process. So that money will go back to the AmeriCorps agency. We won't see any of that money. The other thing to note is that the programs that did get funded, with the exception of the Martha O'Brien Center, and the Martha O'Brien Center was a formula program that was at the end of its 3-year funding process. And so we sent it to the competitive to see if it would get funded, and it did. So they were fully funded in the competitive process. However, the other programs that are just in the not highlighted, the just regular white background, the 3 continuations, and those are the ones over on the far left that have a star after their name. So they're either going into their 2nd or 3rd year of that 3-year process. So they're continuations. If you look at what they asked for in column B compared to what they were funded in column N, they all, again, with the exception of Martha O'Brien, their requests were reduced by roughly about 10% from what they asked for. They were all funded, but less than what they requested. So it's good, but not really what they wanted. And so far, Gordon, correct me if I'm wrong, but all of those programs are accepting the funding. Nobody's saying,
no decline.
No one said, except for Impact, who just isn't continuing at all. None of them had said, we can't make the program work at that level, and therefore we need to potentially go into the formula process. So anyway, that's the competitive process. And if anybody has questions for staff, just shoot. Go ahead with your questions. Otherwise, I'll pull up the formula stuff.
I have no questions.
Yeah, so I just want to kind of recap to make sure We all understand. So there were 8 programs that actually were submitted for the competitive.
Right.
And of those 8, you had 3 that were not funded.
Right.
5 were funded, but 1 declined the funding,
Right.
discontinued the program. Right.
Right.
And then of those remaining 4, only 1 was received 100% of their request.
Right. That's exactly right. Yep.
Okay.
That's it. Yep. So, overall, it's mixed news because we lost 3 programs from the competitive process, but added 1, the Martha O'Brien Center, that was not in the. So there's a net loss of 2 programs from the competitive process. Again, not talking about Impact America because they're just not continuing at all.
Okay.
So, a net loss of 2 competitive programs, and I'll also say as background, the AmeriCorps agency did similar things across the country with state commissions where they stopped funding programs that had been funded for years and cut other programs that they were funding because the amount of money that they had available this year, they ended up with less money than what they need because of how they decided to, at the very beginning of the process, to increase the living allowance for the AmeriCorps members and require an increased living allowance, which in turn, they increased the cost per member or cost per MSY, which is, these 25,000. That's how much per member the program is getting in funding. And so, and part of that was they were banking on an increase in funding from Congress, but they're under a continuing spending resolution, which means that they essentially have the same amount of money that they had last year. So there's no funding increase, but they increased the amount of member living allowance and the cost per member. So when you increase the cost per member, that means that the total that you have available for the number of members goes down without a subsequent or corresponding increase in the level of funding. Hopefully that makes sense and I didn't just really confuse everybody. Okay. Anything else about this chart, or if not, Michael, I'll pull up the next one.
I just have a quick question. Sorry.
Yes.
So the remaining funds, what happens to those, or can they get channeled into somewhere else, or?
Yeah. Well, so these decisions were made by the AmeriCorps agency, and it's for funding that they retain. And that's why it's called national competitive, because programs from across the country compete for that national pot of money. So this $62,000 will go back to the AmeriCorps agency, and my guess is what they will do with that is they didn't waitlist any of our programs, but I know from hearing from other commissions that they did have programs that were waitlisted. So what they'll do is they'll take like this 62,000, and maybe another commission has another program that's not going to continue or whatever. They'll combine all that money and then they'll start funding programs off of their wait list for programs in other states. So it'll get used. It just is not available to Volunteer Tennessee. But that's a good question, because again, even if we could move that money around, it's not really enough for any of the 3 programs that got funded, but we can't move it because it's not our money to move around. Yeah, Adam?
Well, that's what I was that's in the line with what I was just thinking, since they kind of trimmed 10% off, and obviously the bucket will be larger than the 62,000, across the board with the competitive funds, but have they ever gone back and, instead of going to the wait list, funded something at the full request, started with that list instead?
Yeah, so they have in the past, after they've gone through and they've done their initial awards for competitive, or their initial funding announcement for competitives, once they hear back from state commissions about, again, we're telling them that one program just doesn't want money at all, they then factor all that in, and then this go around, I'm pretty sure they're going to go to their wait list first.
Okay.
But once they fund some of those programs on their wait list, they may then come back to us and say, we're going to do supplemental funding. So any of your
Right.
programs that didn't get funded at their full request in the first round, they can now request additional money, and then they would review those and then potentially fund some. So they have
Got it.
done that before. I don't
Okay.
know if they're going to do that this year, but there is certainly precedent for them doing that in the past.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, another good question. Okay. So Michael, I don't know what you would like. So I've got the complicated sheet, but then I also have the sheet that Eileen prepared that has the focus areas. Which one would you like to review first?
Sorry, I'm on mute. I think we have to look at Eileen's sheet first.
Sure. Okay.
Because that will make our decision on our recommendations to the
Sure.
board.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So this is the sheet that Eileen put together, which is really helpful in terms of grouping, putting a lot of information in here. I'm gonna hide. Well, actually, I'm not going to hide those because there's still programs in Tennessee. I am going to hide Impact America because they declined funding. And Eileen, since you put this sheet together, I don't know if there's anything in particular that you want to highlight about it.
Yeah, I'll just explain very quickly what I did. So our committee has several goals for these 3 years now, and I believe the other committees will have it as well. And those goals are based on having at least one program in a focus area, in a specific focus area. So I thought it would be helpful for us if I just prepared a list of all the programs and noted the focus areas and the funding priorities. And I got somewhat confused as I read our goals and then went through the applications and looked at the funding priorities and the focus areas. And so our goals say focus area, but sometimes I wondered, should it really be funding priority? So, you know, I wasn't quite sure. So I put in both of those columns. And I think that as when we share this with the other committees, that we make an across the board decision when we're assessing our goals, that we're all going to look at focus area or we're all going to look at funding priorities, so that we're not, so it's not apples and oranges. Sure. But other than that, I think it's pretty straightforward. One thing that I noticed was that we didn't have any programs, I think, that had food insecurity as a focus area. And I know that we had lots and lots of discussions with the full board and with our committee over the last year related to food insecurity. So probably in future we should look for that, look for potential programs that focus on food insecurity.
Jim, sorry, I'm just jumping in. Jim, didn't we have programs that had that as a piece of what their community efforts were, but maybe not the primary focus?
Yeah, well, we did. That program, though, ceased to operate. The one that had it as kind of a primary was the Appalachian Resource Conservation and Development Council, but they decided not to continue funding. Let me just, and I know this one isn't really a good fit for the Tennessee's Community Assistance Corporation. Theirs is more of, I think, if I remember correctly, like a childhood obesity type thing, and not so much a food insecurity thing. So that's not really a good fit for what we're talking about. But I just want to quickly scroll down to see Eileen's notes about University of the South. There's we'd have to go back and take a closer look, but I think they might have some food security stuff that, and Latifah can certainly talk a little bit more about that.
They definitely do. They have one of their site partners is, they have 2 site partners actually that is around food insecurity.
Okay, good.
Yeah. And then there's the new programs, which you know, I don't think any of them had like a really prominent food security component of theirs. So we still do have a little bit going on out there, but not as much as we did when we had the program that really had food security as a primary focus for their program design.
Yeah. So it's just something that we should consider as we move forward through our 3-year plan.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah. So I thought this would be helpful for us to have everything captured in one place.
Sure. And I'm going to leave this open so we can jump back to this.
Okay.
If we need to come back to it. So this, Michael, are you okay to hop to this one, which is the hardest one because it's got so much stuff on it. And so there's 3 different scenarios, and I'll just tell you really quickly, or and Gordon, if I say this wrong, just let me know. But the first one has a multi-step process to you know, reduce some funding based on performance and then fund some of the new programs. The second scenario essentially fully funds all of our current programs based on what they requested, and then partially funds 2 of the new applicants. And then the third scenario fully funds all of the existing programs and doesn't fund any new programs. And each one of those, so the third scenario leaves about $215,000 on the table. The second scenario leaves about $8,000. And then the first scenario leaves about $86,000. But before we dive too deep into what's left on the table, let me say that for all of these, and sorry, I'm going to change the view so to get rid of that page thing. For all of these, we have not yet received our formula allocation from the AmeriCorps agency, which is a really important part of making the formula funding decision. And normally they would have sent that to us by now, but they haven't. Because it is a continuing spending resolution year, and they've been told you have the same amount of money as last year, my guess is that we're going to have pretty close to this number, which is highlighted in yellow here, the $3,849,181. It'll probably be fairly close to that. But it might not be exactly that. It may fluctuate a little bit because that formula is actually a population formula. So if Tennessee's population has fluctuated relative to other states, we may see a slight increase or a slight decrease. So for all of these, I think we need to keep in mind for what's left on the table is we don't know exactly how much we have. So I think we have to be a little careful in potentially leaving some money on the table right now, because if that number goes down, we might potentially have to go back to a program and say, sorry, we told you you could have X amount, but now we're going to have to give you Y amount instead that is lower because we don't have that money. And it's also possible that we will get the announcement between now and the commission meeting. And so if so, we can plug that number into these sheets and just make sure what the difference might be. And if there is a significant difference, the committee and the full commission can discuss that next week at the commission meeting. So,
hey, Jim.
Yeah.
I got just a question. So we would make the announcement to the programs until after we have the meeting next week and approve on the recommendation by this board, right?
Correct. That's right.
All right. And so if the funding, if the new funding was not received, and then we did communicate this, could we not communicate the message that these figures are based off last year, but they're subject to change based on the new funding formula? Try to get as close as we could now if we're going to communicate anything, but if we know that it's not there, can we just put the caveat that this is based on last year's funding? This is subject to change one way or the other.
Yeah, I would think we would have to do that. And thinking back in the past, I think we may have only been in this situation maybe once or twice in the past, so it hasn't happened a whole lot. But I think we did that. What you're suggesting, I think we did that last time. We put like kind of in big red letters, please notice that we've not yet received our formula allocation. If the numbers may change or something along that line when we did the announcement after the commission meeting. So yeah, I think we would for sure need to do that if we haven't heard by next Wednesday.
Okay.
Gordon, did I leave out anything important on these three scenarios?
No, yeah. The reduction based on performance is based on last program year, and I've updated those numbers. So that's enrollment, performance, actual program performance, retention, and actual timeliness on their reporting is what those, and we're averaging those together, and that gives us a performance number to kind of multiply funding level to adjust. Yeah, I've updated all that, and that's recent based on last program year.
Yeah, and this sheet, you all should have gotten this sheet yesterday. And what Gordon's talking about is so there's the three scenario tabs, and then there's an enrollment and retention tab, performance calculations, and timeliness. Those are all things that go into this block on the scenario one, where we factor in the performance. And so what staff did based on what the grants committee has done in the past is we looked at the performance and we looked at the average percentage of performance across all programs and said any program that is below 86.4 gets reduced based on whatever their average performance is. And so those are the cells in yellow, and how that reduction was done. So let me jump back to the first step. The first step was to say, whatever programs requested for this year, which is in column F, is what we would start out with in the first step. So every current program gets the full amount of what they requested. And I'll just also say in column E, that's what they were funded for at last year, or what is the current program year, just as comparison. So first step, every existing program gets the full amount that they requested, and then no new program gets funded. That leaves about $215,000 on the table. Then applying the performance adjustment, what this does is essentially it takes the number in column J and multiplies it by whatever this percentage is, their average percentage, and then it gives this this revised lower number. So for Appalachian Regional Coalition on Homelessness, this amount, the 480,000, is roughly 83.6% of what they requested. And that's, again, based on their average performance across all of those criteria was 83.6. So only the ones in yellow got reduced. The others that were at or above the average performance stayed at their requested level. So that's a performance adjustment, and that then changes the amount left on the table to 634,000. So the final step in this scenario is to then go back and then use some of that 634,000 specifically to provide full funding for several programs until essentially the money is mostly gone, but also that the funding is not provided for any new or recompeting program, with the exception of bridges. And we can talk about, we should talk about bridges, but any new operational grant or planning grant would not get funding unless they were above the average performance or review score. And the review scores are in column C. And so that's the peer and staff review where we read the applications and give them a numerical score. And then what's in this column C is the average across all of those reviews. And I think most of you have participated in a review at some point in the past, so you're familiar with how that works. And so the difference in this, sorry, I probably should have said this to begin with. In all of these scenarios, the continuation programs are at the top. And so again, those are programs that are going into either their second or third year. At the bottom on all three scenarios are the recompeting programs. So those are currently funded programs that are at the end of their 3-year process. And you see Hands-On, Emerald, Youth Foundation, Bridges, those were all not funded in the competitive process, so they get brought over to this process. And then the programs in red are brand new applicants. So at the top here are the program grants, and so that's for dollars for AmeriCorps members doing direct service. And then this year we had a planning grant process, which is just funding, and the maximum they could ask for was 75,000, so it's not a huge amount of money, but it's just a plan on how an AmeriCorps program would work, and then to eventually submit an application for AmeriCorps funding in the next funding process, or potentially the one after that. So all of the planning grant applicants are grouped together at the very bottom. All of these are in order within their groupings. So the planning grant grouping at the bottom and then the program operational grant at the top are sorted based on their review scores. So the highest scoring in each group is at the very top, and then the lowest scoring is at the bottom of each grouping. And so Bridges, which is a currently funded program, had not a great score. Their score was actually below the operational grant average of 67.61. So again, the committee should probably discuss that a little bit. But jumping back over to step 3, the proposal from staff, and again, this is kind of based on what the grants committee has done in the past, is to fund new programs only if they're at or above the average review score. So there's only one brand new program operational grant that's above that average, and that's Artist Year. And then there were 3 planning grants that were above the planning grant average. And so this proposal, this scenario would fund those 3 that are above that. And again, it leaves 86,000 on the table, but we're not really sure exactly what is going to be actually available. So, I personally am comfortable with leaving $86,000 on the table, not knowing how much we actually have, because it does provide us a pretty good cushion in case our formula funding actually goes down. So Michael, I don't know if you want to dive into this one or if you want to look at the next scenario before we start diving into each one in more detail.
All right. So Jim, that was scenario 1, correct?
That's all scenario 1. Yeah.
All right. On the continuation programs, particularly the ones that we highlighted in yellow, based off our average of performance, were there any factors that contribute to their decrease in performance outside of their control?
Yeah. Well, so let me make this a bit bigger so that you all can actually see maybe the performance scores a little easier. And if you want to open up this sheet that I sent yesterday, it's, you can follow, it might be a little easier to see, but you can see some of the programs had challenges with either enrollment or retention of members. So enrollment is if they were funded for 10 members and they enrolled 10 members, they had 100% enrollment. If they were funded for 10 and they only enrolled 5, they had 50% enrollment. So this is saying, are they utilizing all of the AmeriCorps slots that Volunteer Tennessee awarded to them, but putting an AmeriCorps member in that slot? So that's what that number is. The retention is out of those members who actually join the program, whether it's 10 or 5, how many of those make it to the end of the program year and actually finish the program successfully? And so you can see, I'll just do a quick highlight of programs that, so you can see several of these programs, well, all of the programs that had trouble had either problem with the enrollment rate or their retention rate.
Jim, slide the spreadsheet over so we can see the retention. That's enrollment right there. You're displaying.
Enrollment is in column Q and retention is in column R.
Yeah, I can't see R.
Oh, okay. Let me do this. I'm gonna
there you go.
Yeah, I'm gonna temporarily hide some of these other columns, just to make it fit on the screen a little bit better. Okay. So you can see all of them had either trouble with enrollment or retention. And then a couple of the programs had significant issues related to their actual performance. So this is where they say we're going to tutor 100 children. If they only tutor 50, then they're at 50%. If they tutor 100, then they're at 100%. But there's also, so that's the output, like just a count of the number of people served. Then there's the outcome, which is, out of that 100 children tutored, maybe they say 50 are going to increase 1 letter grade, or that's just an example, but there's some sort of change, and that's the outcome. So if all 50, if they reach 50 children who increase the letter grade, then they have 100% achievement of their outcome. If only 25 children meet that goal when their outcome was 50, then they have 50%. And those numbers get averaged together into these performance numbers. And you can see a couple programs had significant challenges with their performance. Now, again, part of that goes back to the previous, like if they don't enroll all of their members, they're going to have trouble meeting their performance measures. If they lose members during the program year, they're going to have problems meeting their performance. So you could argue that the retention is generally within the program's control. The enrollment, now whether or not they get members to sign up, can be challenging for a program and be challenging in ways that are out of their control. But you can see, in general, most of the programs were able to enroll most of their members, if not all of their members. And again, the high performing programs at the top, like they all had pretty good retention rate as well. So I would say the job market is certainly a challenge for programs that's beyond their control, that goes into the enrollment and potentially into the retention, because if someone finds a job and they just leave to go do a job, that obviously would be a challenge. The performance measures, there may be things that are beyond their control with performance measures. So if a partner decides middle of the year to not partner with them anymore, that could obviously be a challenge. I don't know right offhand, and certainly Gordon and Latifa could talk a little bit more about the 3 programs that are at the very bottom: University of the South, Port-a-Leith, and then Literacy Mid-South. If there's anything in particular.
I can say for Literacy Mid-South did definitely have some stuff outside their control in their performance of partner sites just kind of stopping. A lot of their program was summer stuff, summer reading, and they did that with the Memphis Parks, and Memphis Parks was kind of like, we're not going to do it anymore. So they lost like a whole bunch of potential performance right there. So.
Yeah, and for University of the South, I don't know if we'd say this out of their control, but they were a new program. Literacy Mid-South was as well. But they struggled this last year just with capacity and learning, like shifting from Vista over to state and national. And then they had a really difficult time. Housing is always a thing, but over in Sewanee, it's out of control. Like there's like very limited housing already. And then affordable housing is just nearly non-existent. So that's a part of their situation.
Literacy Mid-South also had enrollment struggles. They're a new program, and they did a lot of changes during the year of the kind of member slots they had. They originally wanted, and were thinking they were going to have a lot more full-time members, and they found it really, really hard to recruit people to do that. So they switched a bunch of their slots to like half-time or quarter-time or much shorter terms, which means they got some members in there, but they ended up with like a lot less kind of their total amount, because we couldn't reduce the amount of total MSYs they had, like, stuff, but they had some enrollment struggles early on because they needed to kind of adjust what they were planning.
Gotcha. Okay.
And how about Port-a-Leith? What they had some retention and like really low performance.
Port-a-Leith, I cannot think of off the top of my head. They actually have had a really good program year in other ways. I just know I'll just say that probably the same variables at play, like just recruiting people. I think I did talk to Judith, who's the program director, just about not the salary, but the wage, the living wage. So yeah, I can't point to anything outside of those like very consistent variables. Okay.
Well, we're at 10:41, so I don't know. If there's other questions about the performance, we can certainly talk about it, or if the committee wants to adjust how that's calculated, we can certainly get into that.
Well, I'll make this quick. The only reason I want to see if there were things outside of their control, then obviously the recommendation seems like it's appropriate. But if there was things that they were failing to do, then we would probably need to reconsider the proposal. But it seems like the staff has done a great job of kind of with this scenario here, where it gives us options, and I open up to everyone else. But I think that I'm good with number 1. But you did mention bridges that we should talk about, and I wanted to ask, how did they fall? What happened? Did they have change in leadership to go from being one of our stronger programs to now where they barely made it? I mean, you showed their score earlier, what, 64%?
Yeah, let me unhide that and bring that back up. Yeah. So yeah, their I mean, really, there's not a whole. I mean, there's a couple percent, tenths of a point difference between them and the Family Scholar House program, but between those and Emerald Youth Foundation, you see it's like a 15-point plus difference between the scores. So I don't think they've had leadership changes.
No,
I think everybody's still there.
Yeah, it's still pretty much the same people.
Yeah.
I will say for Bridges, and not as an excuse or anything, but they had that first draft, the one we're reviewing, which was the first competitive draft because they went through the competitive process, was not good. It didn't. A lot of changes happened in the notice of funding this year, and the application they submitted then didn't have a lot of those. They had told me they were having e-grants issues, but I can't verify that, obviously. And it's, we have to score what was put in and what was submitted. So that's what that is. But
sorry, Gordon, let me just jump in and say e-grants is the electronic grant system that the AmeriCorps agency uses. And so that's how the AmeriCorps programs submit their applications. And then we download them from that e-grant system. So that's what Gordon's talking about in terms of whatever is in there is all we have. And if they have problems, the way they're supposed to deal with that is to do a help desk ticket to note that there were problems. But to me, it sounds like they didn't realize that there was a problem until after the fact, until we had done the first.
We sent them feedback on that first draft as part of the competitive process, and they were like, "We thought we did all this." And I'm like, "Well, the one you submitted didn't have any of these things." So they went back and changed them, but that first one is submitted is what we have to score, and they know that.
Sure.
So.
Sure. And in addition to the challenge with their score, they also had some challenges with their performance rating. So let me scroll up a little bit.
I think they had some similar things. They had some host sites stop, basically like end partnerships in the middle of their program year, because they had pretty good enrollment and retention. They had members. They just didn't have. They lost host sites and they lost some programming because their programming is rather unique. Like, it's not just tutoring, it's not just after school things. And so it's a very specific kind of thing. So when you lose a host site like that, it can be really hard to catch up because you can't just go and easily stand up some other kind of tutoring thing because it's a very specific kind of programming they do.
Sure. So again, I want to make sure we're mindful of time. Michael, what we might want to do is just really quickly look at the other two scenarios and just have the committee rule out ones that they think, right, we just don't want to use that scenario.
Okay.
So just again, really quickly, the second one fully funds all existing programs, including those that we were just talking about that had performance issues, including Bridges, and partially funds the top scoring new operational grant and the top scoring new planning grant. So that's scenario 2. And that only leaves about $8,000 on the table. That may or may not be squeaking by. I don't know. It's hard to know without knowing what our base formula allocation is going to be. And then scenario 3 fully funds all existing programs and does not fund any new program at all. And that leaves about $215,000 on the table.
Okay. I think you're on mute if you're going to talk.
I have a couple of questions and comments. It seems to me that it's worth it for us to fund a brand new program. I think that, for example, Artist Year, it's one of the ones that I reviewed. And their program seems pretty unique compared to the other programs that we have, and I thought they had a really good concept. And so I think it's in the overall scheme of things that it's worth it to let a new program in. That's one comment. And then the question that I have is, this entire selection process and this spreadsheet, is that unique to Volunteer Tennessee, or is it something that's handed down from AmeriCorps and all commissions do it the same way?
Well, each commission has its own process for determining how they're going to fund programs. So, so this particular spreadsheet is something that Volunteer Tennessee has developed over time.
Okay.
And with the different scenarios to give the grants committee a couple different starting points to think about. And then very often the grants committee will say, well, let's look at scenario 2, but let's make these adjustments. And so
Okay.
the committee takes one that they like and then tweaks it a little bit to get it to where they want. But no, this particular setup is something that Volunteer Tennessee has developed.
Okay, so that means then that we could change it slightly if we.
Oh yeah.
Okay,
Mhm.
so so there's no way in this existing process to consider focus areas when we decide on funding.
Oh, yeah, you absolutely can. And we can do that anyway. I will say though, just to jump back to scenario 3 that leaves $215,000 on the table, I think that's too much to leave on the table.
Mm-hmm.
So my recommendation would not to be scenario 3. And again, scenario 3 fully funds all our existing programs and does not fund any new program at all.
Mm-hmm.
We could certainly do that if the committee wants, and we can recommend that to the full commission, but I think it's just too much money to leave out there.
Mm-hmm.
So I would recommend that the committee look between scenario 2 and 1.
Mm-hmm.
And again, scenario 2 fully funds existing programs, regardless of their performance, regardless of their score. They get all the money they ask for, and then partially funds the top 2 scoring new program, the one operational and then the one planning grant.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of using priorities to decide funding, you absolutely can do that, and look at what the existing. Well, one, I would say it would be really highly unusual to defund a continuation program.
Mm-hmm.
So, we kind of have the tacit agreement that they get funding for 3 years and then they have to recompete.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the level of funding the committee can discuss and, do performance adjustments if you want. The new and recompeting, those programs are not guaranteed funding, even if they've been with Volunteer Tennessee for 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
The way the committee has generally approached it is, we've made a lot of time investments of time and money with existing programs over the years. And so generally the committee in the past has not wanted to essentially eliminate a program just because it might have had one bad application year.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of the priorities, looking at particularly the new programs and then these that are recompeting, the 3 that didn't get funded competitively, if the committee wants to tweak funding levels based on priority level or priority focus, you can certainly do that. Again, what the committee has typically done in the past is they've done a cutoff point and said programs that score below the average, we're not really going to consider them. But if there's a particular program focus that one of these new programs has that the commission thinks we should focus on, we can certainly do that and fund them, even though their application score might be below average.
Mm-hmm.
Those decisions are totally up to the commission, the full commission. I mean, the grants committee can only recommend.
Right,
The full commission has to make the final decision.
right. Hmm. I can't decide. I'm a little worried. I'm a little worried about scenario number 2 because it only leaves what, $8,000 on the table.
Yeah, it's pretty close. Yeah.
Yeah.
The only way that might change, and it's not much, Teach America Memphis did send us the unexpended might change a little bit because TFA said they're going to have 8,000, so that would basically turn that into 16,000, which
No,
is
well,
still slim.
yes.
But, or if you, I don't know if you put that.
I've already updated
Okay, well, then never
those
mind.
numbers. Yeah.
Never mind.
Yeah. So what Gordon is talking about, and sorry, I'm going to change the view to get rid of that page. What Gordon's talking about is the carryover number. So that's the estimated amount of money that programs in the current year expect that they're going to have unspent at the end of the current year. And so we carry it over into this upcoming year funding. And then there's also ARPA, or unspent ARPA money that's in here. Those two numbers, the carryover is just an estimate from the programs, but you know, it's all we have. So we have to use their estimate. So this, I think, is as good an estimate as we're going to get on the carryover. The ARPA leftover, that's what we have unspent in our ARPA grant. So that's definitely there. The only thing that's really a big question mark is the actual formula allocation. So this 8,000 is pretty much what I think is going to be left on the table if we get the same amount of funding as last year. Again, if it goes down, then this number left on the table would obviously go down as well. So there's not much of a margin on this one. And to jump back over to the other one, the margin there is about 86,000, which is I think certainly a good enough cushion.
I'll just add commentary. I do appreciate the scenario 1 takes into account performance.
Yeah, and that's something that the committee has been pretty consistent about over time. Is, you know, it's what we used to call right sizing. So when a program doesn't use all of the members that they've been given, or if they're not retaining those members and they're having performance issues, then maybe they need to be cut back a little bit until they can use what they have, what they've been given. And then once they're kind of back up and using what they're given and kind of move back up in the upper part of the chart, then they get more money. But it doesn't have to be the numbers that are used here. Again, this is just a suggestion from staff that's the percentage reductions are based on their performance. So the smallest reduction is about a 16.5% reduction. The largest reduction is about 34% reduction. But if the committee said, okay, programs that are having performance issues, we're just going to do a 20% cut across the board. And so we could do that. That then is going to eat up some of this 86,000. I don't know how much right offhand, but that's a possibility, is to change how the reductions are done. I think that, yeah.
Please correct me wrong, but we've used this in the past, right? When we came up with this performance, I think we used that last year.
Well, we didn't use this last year because of the American Rescue Plan funding. We had more money than we needed. So it's been about two or maybe 3 years since the committee has needed to use this. But yeah, the committee has definitely looked at this same set of performance criteria in the past in making its funding decision.
Yeah,
because it's really one of the only kind of objective ways we have to compare the programs, because they're doing different things. They have different numbers of members. You know, it's hard to compare apples and oranges, but these give us like pretty objective numbers for the program performance that we can use to compare them.
Yeah. Well, we have 2 minutes, and the only thing I wanted to say was that I think we should probably stick with that standard, because, as you said, and it's not apples or oranges, but there are 5 other programs whose performance has been steady. And so, to be fair, I think that the only way is to say when you don't meet that threshold that we established, and I think 83% is a pretty good threshold, then of course your funding should be reduced, regardless of what the reason is, because there are just as many who did not meet the performance or meet that standard. There was another 50% who did, for whatever the reason may be. And so I think using that consistent method should apply here as well. So having said that, I'm going. We got 1 minute.
Yeah. Well, and one thing just to add on, one thing that the committee has done in the past is, you know, there's this section of the chart that's not filled out yet, which is for later on. After we do know what the formula allocation is going to be, and we know for sure what the leftover amount is going to be, the commission could go back and offer for these programs that were reduced, give them an opportunity for some supplemental funding. And until we use up whatever is available.
Yeah,
so like that option is certainly out there.
Just to recap one thing, in scenario 1, who gets funded in the new programs and in the planning?
Yeah, sure. So the only operational grant new program would be Artist Year.
Okay.
Because it was the only one that had above average review scores.
Okay.
Then there were 3 planning grants that had above average scores. And so it's East Tennessee State, the Tennessee Charitable Care Network, and the United Way of West Tennessee. And again, those are planning grants. They're just, you know, around $75,000 to plan for potentially applying down the future. They're not required to apply, but our hope certainly is that they would use the money to plan for a successful application and successful grant later on.
Okay. In that case, I would like to go with scenario 1. With the option of, if we get more money than we think we're going to get, to look at some supplemental funding.
Sure.
That's I think that's what I would feel best about.
Okay. Well, and just to clarify, even if we get exactly the same amount, we're still going to have $86,000 that the committee could come back later and dole out based on knowing what we have.
Right.
I don't know if we need a vote, but I would second Eileen's motion.
Another day.
Yeah, I don't know that. I mean, I don't know that you need to vote. I mean, I think consensus is fine if the committee agrees that they want to go with scenario 1 and present that to the full commission. That I think that's enough. I don't think we need to actually have a vote.
Well, I agree with the committee. Option number 1, or recommendation number 1.
Okay.
Okay. Well, we'll prepare this version then for the commission for next week, and we'll present this. And then, you know, obviously, if commission members have questions and want to tweak it, that's their prerogative. But you know, usually they take the grants committee recommendation.
Right.
Okay.
Okay. Sounds good to me.
I just have one follow-up question. Has anyone spoken to Bridges? And I guess they should see this. I mean, they're going to get funding here, but they said they had issues with the competitive process with their grant application being uploaded. And it seems like here in the recompete, their scores are even were probably lower. Well, I don't even know, I can't say probably, but they were still low here at our level. So that I'm looking at this as competitive, they wouldn't, for whatever reason, were not selected. And then here they had a low score. So is there something else going on there that we may need to talk to them? Because how do you go from being one of the more competitive programs to this year you're in the recompete, and then either recompete your scores even lower?
I did talk to Bridges, and I think they would say that they struggled a lot putting their program design into the changes in the notice of funding. That's what they expressed to me in a conversation I had with them. That's what they expressed to me. I agree. I agree. It is a good program. They do good things, but I think they struggled in fitting all the things that have to fit in there in the changes in the notice and trying to hit what they thought was important. And obviously they missed some things for the competitive thing. And then they had the issue of whatever happened with e-grants and yada about their first draft getting reviewed in the formula process. So their final competitive draft was obviously better, but it obviously wasn't, good enough or whatever, had issues with it. So for the competitive level. So.
Okay.
Sometimes it looks like recompeting programs cut and paste from earlier applications, and
Yes.
sometimes it doesn't make sense anymore.
Yes, and we warn them about that. We say,
Yeah.
do not cut and paste because things have changed, and they still
Right.
do it.
Yeah.
So
I spent a lot of time in the fall telling everybody that the notice has changed. You cannot do that. There are new questions.
Right.
But from their perspective, it's easier to cut and paste than to try and generate a brand new application. So
yeah. I understand why they do it.
yeah, me too.
But they should at least have somebody read it over on their end to see if it still makes sense and if it's true.
Agreed. Yeah, that's the other thing is we recommend that they have someone other than the person who wrote it review it.
Yeah.
So
Peer
Yeah,
review.
not ChatGPT.
Not ChatGPT. ChatGPT did not do a good grant application.
okay. Well, Michael, I don't know if there's anything else you want.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Good.
Okay. Well, in that case, then we'll use this version. We didn't make any changes to it, so I'll just we'll send this out to the full commission for discussion next week.
Sounds good.
Okay. All right. Thanks,
Thank y'all for
everyone.
pulling
All right.
this
Thanks,
together.
everybody.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
Bye-bye.
Bye.